Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And
we're back.
with Chris, Joe, and Rob.
You know what's funny is my daughter knows how to repeat the
whole phrase?
the intro perfectly well. She's like, and now, if you have any questions?
And now here's my dad. Wow. Well, I am happy to have invited this gentleman along. I've known Frank for probably at least a decade, maybe longer, and he served with me on the MLS advisory group. I learned more about appraisals from this gentleman than probably anybody out there, and I'm still learning. And it's Frank Lucco. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Oh, thank you very much.
And, Frank was telling me some things the other day, and I'm starting to hearing about all these other people who have authority to do eminent domain. Talk about a little bit about how you got into the appraisal side of the world.
By accident. Back in the late 70s, I was working on a marine biology degree, and I always liked real estate. I saw the late night shows, Hawaiian shirts, big yachts,
no money down,
and was interested in it. And my boss hired me. He was looking for a residential appraiser. And back then, all you needed was a camera, a clipboard, and a car. And you could get in it if you had a salesman's license or a broker's license. So that's how I stumbled into the business. I never even couldn't spell the word appraisal when I started.
You can now, though, right?
Barely.
Okay.
He was going to appraise marine biology and shifted it to land.
So, when I was talking to you, we were actually with our dear friend Shad Bogany. We're talking about that, and then we started talking about that I had done this special commissioner with the good judge here, and you said, "Well, I've done a lot of that stuff." And I said, "There's a show, because that's a process that not many people know about, and of course, you come into those situations to kind of prove up values. So the values when we worked on ours the other day was." They were doing a lot of comparisons of, they're taking a strip of land, but they were comparing, one side was comparing it to very expensive commercial properties, and of course the county side was comparing it to residential properties, and neither side was getting it right. Let's talk about how you can extrapolate values. And by the way, I rented that word for the day. I have to have it back tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha, okay.
That's one of those short-term rentals.
There you go. Values, I guess I'd start off with saying there is no 1-800 value of a property. The reason I have a job is real estate is somewhat complicated and somewhat complex. There are multiple ways to go about establishing value, but for the most part, we think of three traditional ways, which is the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. Sales comparison approach is most understandable to the layperson. That would be as you would go out and look and try and buy a house for sale, you would look at other houses that are currently for sale and maybe other houses that have also sold. And from those, in your mind, you would say, that one's a little better, that one's not quite as good, that one's almost the same, so it's got to be around $350,000.
Yeah, and you also use laws of substitution, too.
Most definitely. So the appraiser approaches it from that approach. Another approach, which is a little more complicated, is called the cost approach, and that's where the appraiser estimates the underlying site value, reproduction cost new of improvements, takes away depreciation, and adds in site improvements, and that generates a number. And the third approach, which is probably the most complicated approach, is the income approach, and that's where you're estimating a future anticipated income stream. On a residential property, it's usually done with a gross rent multiplier. On a commercial property, it may be a discounted cash flow or some type of other analysis, but you're looking at the expenses, you're looking at the income, and you're gauging on what others might pay for that kind of investment.
And in that process, I remember I used to do commercial development. I actually had an appraisal that actually was a full narrative appraisal and used all three of them to come up with the final values in all three methods and applied it. And I guess they took averages or something like that and applied it to that. And that's what I took to the bank.
Yes, most definitely. And they'll usually not so much an average, but definitely they'll weigh one approach and weigh the data and say, hey, based on this type of property and the kind of evidence that I have, this approach makes the most sense. And at the end of the day, I'm leading toward this value range.
But again, when you're taking a strip of land, that's one thing. But I know in some cases, sometimes a building has to be raised to make room for a road or thing like that. And several buildings left when I-10 was being done.
Oh, yeah.
And so the landowner's going, well, this building's worth this, and I've got this much income coming. They're going to lose all that projected future income. How can you compensate them for that?
There's a couple ways to do it. As you might guess, this line of appraisal work isn't really much different than property tax protests. If I go out to appraise individual's home, for instance, and I show up on a day where they're trying to get a 3.5% mortgage interest rate because they're refinancing, their house is the Taj Mahal.
And of course, call Chris Kelso if you're going to do that.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with this wonderful establishment they're living in. On the other hand, the very next day, if I go out to see that house and they're trying to protest their taxes, it's a dump. And they'll point out everything that's wrong with it. So in their own mind, there can be a $300,000 shift in what the property value could be worth,
depending on what they're up to at the moment.
On their purpose.
Every year I have clients call me and says, "Oh man, they just went up on my tax appraisal again," and I goes, "Well, what they appraised it for?" And they'd say, and I said, "Would you sell it for that?" "Oh no, that's too low." I go, "Well, that's probably right then."
That's exactly right. So that human beings being what they are, the job of the appraiser is to try and interject some objectivity to the process. And so theoretically, the landowner appraiser and the county appraiser, in an ideal world, they would come in at the same number. But even if they weren't on opposite sides, under any kind of circumstances, it's not easy to come in at the same number. I can send 10 appraisers from my own office out to appraise the same property, and they're not going to come in at the same number. There's a lot that goes into it. It is a blend of an art and a science.
So if you're the landowner in the situation that's dealing with, I just went brain dead when I would say the word, eminent domain issues. I still had imminent in my head.
Not be confused with imminent.
Yes. If you are imminently facing an eminent domain situation, what's the criteria for hiring or going about working with an appraiser?
A couple things. Again, depending on the type of property, if it's residential, you're going to want somebody who has residential experience. If it's commercial, you're going to want to know some about commercial experience. And then a lot of these properties have a business tangent to them. So there's something that needs to be calculated as far as the business value, what we call a going concern. And an example for that, which reminded me of the first break, if we were talking about the Katy Freeway, if you look at the Katy Freeway and Beltway, a classic case there's a multi-level hotel there that won $6 million because they wrapped the Beltway around it, and they were able to argue this is how much it's hurting our income stream. So in that case, you are taking the income stream in consideration, but as the judge indicated, it's not the income stream for the next 50 years that you might own it. Everything is brought down to the current date of value. So if you no longer own this property, what's it worth to you today? And not necessarily to you, what is it worth to the market today? And if you're doing income-producing property, then you are discounting a future income stream, and you would use that to calculate the value of the property.
Because I would have no idea what questions to ask in assessing a appraiser for the job, other than how much do you hate the government. So.
Well, I think the appropriate questions would be, are you familiar with the eminent domain process? Do you have experience in this? Do you have geographic competency? How long have you been into business? Have you worked in these other kind of cases? And a good question is, have you worked on both sides? Sometime for the property owner and sometime for the condemning organization, because you are looking for somebody that's believable, objective, and can be fair about the process.
And support your opinion. That's what you want, right?
Yes.
Well, you would like that, but the appraiser is bound by uniform standards of professional practice. They got a code of ethics and standards, so everybody has their own idea what a good appraisal is, but if the homeowner would like $500,000 and the appraiser can only come up to $300,000,
it must be the appraiser's fault. It's
the appraiser's responsibility to tell the homeowner, take the $310 they're offering you. I only see $300.
And if a landowner hires you, you come in with an appraisal. Do they have any opportunity to say, hey, that sounds crazy to me. That it seems way off. Can they get a second opinion? In essence.
Oh, most definitely. We do a lot of work for FEMA, one of our biggest clients. They do both voluntary and involuntary buyouts, and they'll order appraisals, and the homeowner or property owner gets a chance to order appraisals. A lot of times when you're thinking about this, if you've been presented the letter and you know what the other side is going to offer you, you can hire an appraiser and say, hey, look, I'm interested in preliminary. Take a look at this. Am I in the ballpark? And if it is, I'm not going to spend any money. I'll sign on a dotted line and move on.
That brings up an interesting question when you talk about FEMA, and they're condemning it because it's now considered, not, you can't live in this thing because it's in a floodway, flood zone. I think along the San Jacinto River, they've had gone back and forth with some properties on that area. What is your value of your property at that point if you know that they're not going to allow any more residents to be there? Doesn't it really diminish the value of the property?
Well, here's how it typically works. In these cases, the appraiser is it would be similar for pipelines. It's similar for freeways. It's similar for these flood-related issues. We were awarded Galveston County and the city of Galveston. We did all those houses up along the coast after Hurricane Ike, and we also did all those ones back in '98 that were on the river, Trinity River. We did thousands of properties on the Trinity River, and the interview process to the property owners is very fascinating because I had individuals on the Trinity River that had flooded houses, their own house out 19 times in the last 22 years. They were literally making a living off money from the government. So that's when the government came out.
People
and said,
do that?
3 strikes and you're
Do
out.
we have a program that allows that to happen?
What?
And so when I interview, a reasonable question to a property owner is not, was your house in good condition? 'Cause you know what kind of answer you're going to get.
The sarcasm of the hosts and or guests may not be the views of the station.
So what you have to be objectively, you have to go about it a little more scientifically. When did you replace your AC? When did you replace your roof?
Which time, right?
Roof plumbing. And so when they're pulling out the avocado appliances and the gold shag carpet, and they say they just put it in last year, you got to question, where did they get it from?
Oh,
Absolutely. So which store still sells that, by the way?
Exactly.
We are coming up against a break and
Gotta pay
we're
for the
having
show.
great subject matter. We're going to continue on, but we have to take a break, so stay tuned for the next segment. We'll be right back.
I love.
I live in a tiny closet, a lukewarm cold water flat, with room for a couple of cinders and a mouse, a hole and a trap.